welcome back to the early read college basketball crunch time here for the regular season. We got about 2 weeks left for the high majors, about a week left for the mid majors, and it's getting that time. March Madness. A lot of people coming into the space. They want to know what's going on with these teams. They want to get an idea, and I kind of want to spray the board, talk about as many teams as possible. So when you sit down, basically any day for the next month, you see these teams, maybe, the early read gave you a little bit of insight into some of these teams. So to do that, I bring on one of the best college basketball minds in the space. It's Isaac Trotter, at Isaac Trotter at Isaac_Trotter on Twitter. He's a national college basketball writer for 24/7 Sports. Isaac, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I wanted to start, before we do my guy, not my guy, I wanted to talk about an article that you wrote, I believe it's now like a week and a half ago, maybe, one of your daily columns about the transfer portal and how some of these teams have flamed out that went so transfer heavy. And the subject of the article was St. John's. This was in the wake of their blown double-digit lead to Seton Hall, and their bubble hopes are in peril. We'll call it Arkansas. It's been a year for hell for the Must Bus. So, Isaac, I want to ask you, in your findings, in your opinion, is there a developing science to the transfer portal and how to really build your team? Because in both college football and college basketball, it feels like you do need to use the transfer portal to a certain amount, but is there any finding yet, or is it still too early before maybe we know what the exact amount actually is?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think this cycle, when I talked to a lot of coaches, they really liked this cycle, the transfer cycle of 2023. So I think a lot of coaches were really fired up to add a bunch of transfers. But I do think the trend of having more transfers, like more than 7 transfers. So in basketball, you have 13 scholarship spots, maybe 12 is what most teams will take. When you have more than half your rosters as new guys, the new transfers coming in, I think that's the science right now where it's like, man, that's tough to win. It's really tough to fully get that group together. And we've seen little pockets of it, but I think it's more outliers. I remember those Iowa State teams that TJ Otzelberger turned around right away, or Kansas State, where would they be without that turnaround that they had? And a lot of that was due to the portal as well. So it's not a one end all be all from one thing, but I do think that this year, what we're starting to see is it's hard to win in college basketball when other teams are retaining stars and they got 4 guys coming back in the same role. And then they can just go and get 1 or 2 transfers to mix in with a couple freshmen. That feels like the right mix compared to hey, St. John's, we're getting with 11 transfers coming in. Hey, we know you guys were all alphas last year, but hey, you know what, Jordan Dingle, you're not going to get 20 shots tonight. You're going to get 11. Hey, Joel Soriano, you got to adjust. Hey, Glenn Taylor, you got to adjust a little bit. You're not the alpha on a really bad team in Oregon State anymore. I think that's the part of it that's hard. Is it the case moving forward full time? No, but I do think the teams that do win with a lot of transfers, man, their coaches must be really locked in, because that is not easy to do.
Yeah, it's a tough, and again, it feels like it's becoming like NBA free agency or any free agency where you're putting these teams together and they could look so different year to year. Whereas, just it's a small sample. I'm kind of going off the top of my head, but Tennessee this year, a team that I've spoken about on the podcast, I like a lot. I think everybody likes them a lot, but they bring back a bunch of key guys and they drop in Dalton Connect, who may be that missing piece, or maybe a team needs a lead ball handler and they go hit the portal for that, to upgrade there, but they retain with their NIL deals and everything, 3-4 of the guys in the key rotation, maybe a freshman, he levels up as a sophomore. It feels like that's where you're starting to see, and coaches with maybe a little bit more foresight to see okay, well, we were good at this last year. We need to work on this year. Let's go out and fix that in the portal. I guess what I'm trying to say is the development of, you don't need to develop a 4-year roster anymore in a depth chart. You can fill the gaps through the portal, but you can't paint the whole canvas through the portal.
And I don't think every team that got 7 transfers this year wanted to do that. There's plenty of first-year coaches who they do not want to do that. It's kind of have to, right? Penn State, you get the job, everybody leaves. You get Kanye Clary back now before he left the team. And you kind of got to, you just got to go in the portal and get guys, because you have to show some semblance of progress. So it's not, I don't think I'm going to expect Mike Rhodes to go into the portal in 2024 and get 7 transfers and try to do this thing again. But maybe it's a sign for Eric Musselman, who has been very confident going in the portal and reloading every year, that I just can't necessarily live this way. Living on the margins is tough. And like you said, like I think that there is a real pattern of, like you said, Tennessee, like Connecticut is the same way. UConn got a bunch of their returners back. They have a really nice recruiting class, but man, you pop in that guy like Cam Spencer into that mix, and it really just coalesces together well. Houston, they got a lot of those returners back. Jamal Shed comes back. They get their big men back. Jawan Roberts is awesome. JoJo Tugler, a freshman, comes in and is starting to play. But hey, you put that one piece of LJ Cryer and it starts to really mesh together. So I think that's the recipe that a lot of coaches want to do. Some are in better situations than others to actually execute it.
100%. And yeah, if you want to read that in full, go check it out on Isaac's Twitter from 24/7 Sports. I thought that was a great insight into kind of the greater landscape of the transfer portal in college basketball. So let's do a little my guy, not my guy. I haven't done this in a few weeks. So Isaac, for first time on the pod, my guy, not my guy. One person, it could be a team, a ref, a player, a guy who hooked you up this past week. Thinks deserves a little bit of shine. He's your guy of the week, not my guy. Let him know, like, you screwed me over. He's not your guy. Pretty simple. So I'll let you go first. Who's your guy of the week? We'll start positive.
Jalen Tyson out of Cal. I love this dude. He's one of my favorite players on college basketball. Just a complete, utter stud. If you like gambling on basketball, his overs all year long have been big time in the prop market. And I think he's a first round pick, and it's cool to start seeing him develop and start to get that buzz. He was 21st in Sam Vecini at the Athletics, early look at 2024 NBA draft. And I think that's right on the money. And he's a guy that I think early in the year, I was excited about him in the portal of like what he could potentially become. And he's been so much better than I thought. And it's just so fun watching him he's really turned into one of my favorite players in the sport. He's got this little 17-foot, 1-foot runner that's just sick. And he's 6'7". It's just, he is a delight to watch play basketball every night. I love him.
Yeah. I wish Cal, the wins came together a little bit more quick. As someone who took Cal in their season-long pool, I was hoping that the Golden Bears maybe a little bit more friskier than what are they, like 9-17? But Mark Madsen, he's building something there. So I like Cal as well. I like Jalen Tyson as well. I think he's definitely a next-level guy. Mine, going a little bit further back, Great Osborne from Utah State, one of it feels like the Mountain West just produces like really versatile big men at all. Like year over year, these guys just keep coming through. Osborne, against San Diego State specifically, really high-level Mountain West game. Jalen Ledee, Great Osborne, it was like a King Kong versus Godzilla, felt like. Osborne, just sublime. 17, 7, and 7. Great facilitating, laying the game. San Diego State started setting doubles at him. He was kicking right out. Boom, boom, boom. Utah State, who I don't know if they will go the furthest in the tournament. I don't really know how to figure out the Mountain West. I feel like all these teams have such really distinct flaws, but Utah State with Osborne in the middle, he was in the tournament last year with Danny Sprinkle at Montana State, so a little bit of blood there. Utah State, I know they're a transfer heavy team though. Isaac, any thoughts on the Ags and Great Osborne in general?
No, that's a great poll. Great Osborne's a stud. I think a lot of people really like Danny Sprinkle as a head coach. I would be surprised if Utah State can hold on to him because a lot of high majors, I think, are circling the waters. Like I look at Washington. If Washington opens up, he goes there, right? Like I think that would make a ton of sense for them. But no, this team is really good. And like we talked about earlier, if you're able to reload with transfers and find a way to win at a high level, that means that you're doing some really good things. And Sprinkle's certainly done that. One underrated guy, I think, for that group is Ian Martinez. Getting him out of Maryland, like that didn't create really many ripples nationally, but that's a big time addition for them now that Maryland could really use right now. I think Maryland would be in a very different state if Ian Martinez had been on there. So he's another great piece for them. I just like a lot of dudes on their team. Like they just have a lot of balance, and Osabor is the one that really brings it all together, meshes it all together. I think he can go toe to toe with literally any big man in the college basketball, maybe outside of Zach Edey. He doesn't necessarily have that size. Maybe he's not that Donovan Clingan or Hunter Dickinson level.
Yeah.
If we're talking that second tier of big men, he's right up there as good as it gets.
Yeah, I think Utah State, because new coach, obviously, it's not your typical Utah State team where they're bombing from the perimeter. They're a team that's going to go inside. So I don't even know where they're going to be on the bracket, but it could be an interesting case if you get maybe a overrated high major that's a little soft on the interior, doesn't pressure the rock. Or
what if you're playing Wisconsin? What if they get in that Wisconsin 4-5 draw there? Like that would be a really interesting
matchup for Wisconsin.
That's disaster.
You could see the helmet. I'm a Wisconsin grad. It's Wisconsin needs a very distinct group of opponents to go on a run. They don't match up super well with especially teams that could kind of pound you inside, that could run you off the 3-point line. It's not looking great for the Badge. But okay, not my guy of the week. Who's someone that you got to kind of let know they let you down?
Lance Jones, man. I
Okay.
cannot bet a Lance Jones under without it hitting ever. Like I'm always on Lance Jones unders and it just never happens. And it's always in the most crushing ways. So he's not my guy this week, but I have a lot of respect for him because he's an absolute bucket. He was one of those dudes that I did the story in the summer where I talked to a bunch of coaches that played against these guys. And one of the coaches that I talked to was like, Lance Jones, like, come on, man. Like, you're going to go to Purdue. You think you're going to play all these things. Like, you really think you're going to be a good player here. And he's been awesome for them. And so it's really cool to see that. I keep doubting it. I keep under 14 and a half, under 15 and a half. It just never happens. So Lance Jones.
Your motivation.
That's right.
Motivation.
That's right. I don't think I've hit a Lance Jones bet all year long. And I'm like dialed on my props. Like that's what I love to do in college basketball season, outside of like just writing and stuff, obviously. But yeah, man, like I can't get Lance Jones right. And he's just too good. He's just too good.
So my guy, this is like distinct, like very anecdotal here. Yves Missy for Baylor. Meltdown of the season potentially. I'm sitting there, Baylor plus 2.5. Slow start, we'll call it. They spot Houston 17 points, never a good sign, but it wasn't one that I like wanted to turn off because I had a feeling like some hot shooting. I think Baylor could settle in at home, and they end up rallying back. Missy down 2. Again, I'm sitting 2.5, like maybe miss the bunny and like have the clock run out. I'm not complaining. Gets fouled and won his first bucket, I believe, of the game. He was playing pretty terrible all 40 minutes. Of course, he misses the free throw. It was like a 50% free throw shooter. And then overtime, layup, point blank, just completely fumbles the ball, point blank layup. And then on like another possession, Baylor going in for a layup. I can't remember who it was. He dunks it home, clear offensive interference. Baylor ends up losing by like 6 or 8 or something. They don't cover. So Yves Missy, you are not my guy. That one hurt. Even though I do think you've actually made some strides as a player and as a pro prospect, you're not my guy. Listen, we don't judge anyone in terms of talent. It's strictly if you're my guy or not my guy.
Absolutely not. And if he got drafted by my favorite team in the NBA, I'd probably be fired up because Yves Missy's a stud. He's a beast.
Yeah, and so that was a tough one on Saturday. Baylor, Houston going down in flames in overtime. But anyway, let's talk about what happened on Saturday, though, because I thought that there were a lot of interesting results and a lot of good talking points, Isaac. I want to start with that Houston-Baylor game. To me, and I guess I'll let you tell me if I'm overthinking it or if I might be onto something. So I am of the belief that Houston, obviously very good. They're number 1 in Ken Palm. I'm not breaking any news. I don't know if I could buy into them as winning the national championship. Maybe it's like a slightly a hot take, but I've got to put my flag in the sand somewhere. I just don't know if I trust the shot making. This is a team that's outside the top 200 in effective field goal percentage. I feel like the offense is over reliant on second chances, and they play too slow that if the wrong team comes in and plays them on the wrong night, they could get just outshot like Miami did to them last year in the NCAA tournament. So I'm working on this hot take that I think Iowa State is actually the team that people think Houston is. I think Iowa State has more offensive firepower, another elite defense, maybe not as a physical on the offensive glass, but I think Iowa State maybe has a higher ceiling than Houston does. Am I overthinking this, or am I maybe onto something?
I'm really right there with you on Houston. The one thing I keep going back with Houston all year is their shot diet. So they are the lowest high major team in shots at the rim, percentage of shots at the rim. I think just like 25%. It's the lowest in all of college basketball. And so like in the first half against Baylor, me going into this game, I know that stat. I'm thinking about it and I'm watching it, and they got 9 shots at the rim in the first half and they're winning 40-25. And I'm like, I'm right. Like when you get to the rim, like this is really good. Like this is what you need to do. And then in the second half, they completely go away from it. They had 3 shots in the rim in the second half and overtime combined. So like that's my hesitancy to fully buy in with them, because when they get downhill and when they get to the rim and Emmanuel Sharp is there and you get that good Jawan Roberts minutes where he can really put pressure on the rim, that's when I think they're at their best offensively. But we just don't see it long enough. It doesn't feel like they're consistent. So I've called Iowa State Houston light all year, but I think I'm getting there closer with you where they might be a little bit closer than I originally thought. And part of that is, Keyshawn Gilbert's been a lot better than I thought he was going to be this year. And then Milan Momcilovic, I really liked him coming out of the class of 2023. He's been great as a big time shot maker, just mixing it up for them as a 6'10" guy who can really just do some different things. And just he doesn't necessarily make a ton of shots all the time, but the gravity that he creates for his group is really huge too. So I think I still like Houston a little bit more than Iowa State long term, because Taman Lipsey's injury scares me just a touch off of Iowa State. But I think they have a lot of those same concerns. Like, they have a lot of the same strengths, and they also have a lot of the same weaknesses. And that shot diet continues to scare me with Houston. And is part of the reasons why, like, if I'm doing my tiers now for college basketball, it's like, title contenders, that's the one thing that just holds me back a little bit with Houston.
I agree. And again, it's not like I'm saying like Houston's bad. Like, they're
No.
obviously they're amazing, but it's like when you're trying to win 6 games come March, to me, like, I do my Ken Pom 2020, like basically you need to be super balanced. I know Houston's inside that 20 on offense, but like, I think it's overinflated. Like, it's all based around their ability to like beat the crap out of teams, where like, I just don't know if that's going to work for 6 games. That's, and their defense is so compact and they could turn you over. They also allow a ton of threes. They could really fall into a trap where some team that's just shooting lights out could run you off the floor, in my opinion.
And we saw it with Kansas, right? Like, that Kansas obviously executed an awesome game plan, but if your bigs can pass and you have just enough shooting, you get open looks against Houston. Now they're banking on them just, they're like open threes against Houston and open threes against, like, I don't know, Kentucky are way different, because I feel like the open threes against Houston, like, you see the shooter, he catches it and he's like, oh my God, I got like 0.2 seconds.
I got to get this up. I got to check this up real quick.
Right? Like, no one's comfortable. So yeah, it might be open, but it's not a comfortable open three. So that's the one difference. But you're right. Like, Houston is not unbeatable. And if we've learned anything with college basketball this year, like, especially with the portal, I really think that the talent level throughout the sport is just deeper. There's a lot better teams. I don't think the gap between those elite teams at the top of at the top of Ken Pom and the other ones, maybe at like 30, is honestly that wide. Maybe the numbers, I could look back at the numbers and maybe the gap isn't quite that wide from a numbers perspective, but just from the eye test, I don't think that there's some monster gap on a neutral floor between the first best team in college basketball and like the 30th.
I completely agree. Like, when I've been doing like some radio hits and everything, they're like, like, what do you think? Like, like, insert like UConn, Purdue, or whoever, like to frame the question. And I'm like, last year, like, if you look on like paper and like you show it to someone 10 years ago and it was FAU, San Diego State, Miami, and UConn, like, they would be like, what even is this? Like, I think it won't be a blue blood centric Final Four probably, if I had to guess. I just think like there's too much variance right now, and there's too many. The top isn't as top heavy, and the middle is much higher. Like you said, like that 1 to 30 range, it's as probably narrow as I can remember. So I think you can see like a kind of wacky, untraditional Final Four when it's all said and done.
Well, and I think the bracket's going to be everything this year. Your draw is going to really, just impact how far you can go. I just think a lot about that Kansas draw that they got a couple years ago, where you just looked at it and it's like, man, that's really soft. And then all of a sudden Kansas is winning the national championship because they just cruised through it and got the right breaks. So I wonder what those brackets look like. I'd love to fast forward 3 weeks from now and have a bracket in my hand and start to actually see it.
100%. One other game, and we kind of just hinted on it, but Kentucky, Alabama. Kentucky scores 118, I think it was 117 against Alabama. So I guess maybe we'll just stick with like my working theories, and Isaac, you'll tell me if I'm like overreacting or underreacting. But I think Alabama and Auburn, I would be stunned. And I group Auburn in there, but I'd be stunned if either ends up in the Final Four. I think that I like to call them home court merchants. I think that they just feast on a home crowd. They play with a lot of energy at home. They're not the same team on the road. And that game at Rupp Arena, I know people love to get really excited about Kentucky. It's like every week we get Kentucky's really overrated and they're a disaster. And then like the next game is like, wow, like look at the ceiling on this team. Like this team is legit. To me, I don't think Kentucky's even close to a contender, but those, especially Alabama and Auburn, home court merchants. I don't trust the defense one bit. When that team, they're not playing the tournament at Coleman Coliseum. They're not playing at the Jungle. I don't see how these teams make a run come tournament time. I just think they're too home court dependent.
I don't think that's crazy. I think, and it's funny, it's just so opposite reasons, right? Like with Auburn, they have no semblance of anything on the back end. Like I honestly think that Nate Oates has just quit about like thinking that this group is going to get it together defensively. And, heading into that game against Kentucky, teams were only shooting like 30% from three against Alabama, and their defense still wasn't great. But that was with really helpful shooting regression from three, where you're kind of getting a little bit lucky on that perspective. And then Kentucky goes absolutely nuclear from three. And so I think that's like the downside of this Alabama, which is I'm right there with you. Like, I just don't think that, just to win 6 games in a row, even 4 games in a row, it is going to be tough. I would be surprised if Alabama gets there. Maybe, again, they get the right draw. Maybe, again, they don't miss a 3 for 2 weekends in a row, but it's just not sustainable for 6 straight. Then with Auburn, it's like a completely different angle just because the half-court offense like just goes AWOL at times. It's like if they can't get offensive rebounds or Janai Broome can't instill his will, that just changes it for me. And, Aiden Holloway was a guy I really liked. I was really high on him at the beginning of the year, and he has those moments that he tries to suck me back in with the, he gets drop coverage, pulls up, hits 5 threes. It's like, man, like there's something there, but he just hasn't been consistent enough. And I worry about their shot making. I don't know about you. Like, do you like how deep they are? Like, I go back and forth on it because I understand like their depth they use to their advantage because they play so damn hard and like they're always like flying around. But like, there are dudes in that rotation that are on the floor for Auburn that should not be on the floor. And I really want to see their best players on the floor for 30-ish minutes. And I think that might hold them back from necessarily reaching that next tier.
So I think it's good for a long haul of a season. Like, okay, they lose Jalen Williams I haven't seen a time frame. It wasn't season ending. That's all I know. I just don't know if he's back like against Tennessee upcoming or like in 2 weeks for the SEC tournament. I think it's a blessing and a curse because you have more guys that are more like ready to step in. But like when it comes like tournament time, like does Bruce Pearl really have his guys that he's leaning on, or is he leaning on like riding the hot hand a little too much where like that could kind of get you into trouble come tournament time? Like to me, like you need your 6 or 7 guys you could just kind of lean on. I don't know if Auburn even knows who that is, especially now with Jalen Williams. I guess it works both ways though.
They don't. And they're fine with that. Like they're banking on like our second unit's going to be like, better outplay your first unit that's tired. That's kind of like game plan there. And we're just going to heat you up. But the other thing with that Auburn that I don't necessarily like is like they can't defend without fouling at times. Yep. It feels like they just, and again, that's the game plan. And at home, it works because they're just banking on these refs at home in the jungle, not calling a foul on them every single possession. Yeah. And I don't know if that's necessarily going to play in March. Like there could be times where they're giving up 32 free throw attempts, and it's just going to be really hard to beat that no matter how good you are on the other end.
So just a few numbers on Auburn in particular that I think stand out to me. Like when I'm analyzing this team, like, okay, can this team go out and win, 3 straight weekends, run the table and win a national championship? Because on paper, this team is inside like that 2020 bucket. Like Auburn looks like, if you just look at the numbers, they look like a title contender. And then you dig a little bit deeper, you see that this team is outside the top 200 and away from home rating. And eye test tells me they're way worse than that. Per shot quality, this team is in the half court at a bottom 25%. They are constantly running up and down the floor. They don't want to set their half court offense because they're outside the top 300 in terms of catch and shoot 3-point points per possession and off the dribble 3 points per possession. So when this game bogs down come tournament time, which they tend to do, they're not going to be able to hold up offensively. So I know it's a really good defense. They're physical, they're aggressive, but the offense, like, no thanks. I'm out on Auburn.
Yeah, and the other thing too with them is Denver Jones, I think, has done a really nice job of settling into being a defensive stopper. But that dude was a bucket last year, like a complete straight up killer. And I'm not sure he has the energy to play defense at the level that Bruce Pearl needs him to play it, and then turn around and go get them buckets on the other end. It feels like he just doesn't have that energy in him. And I understand it. Like that is not easy. I'm not saying he's doing anything wrong. It just kind of is what it is at this point. And I kind of expected him to be a little bit more of like that, a dude who could go get you one. And I don't know if Auburn necessarily has that in its anymore. And I thought they might have, and I don't know if they're quite there.
Okay, a few more things I like takeaways from the weekend. Wake Forest, you in or you out?
In. I like that team. Yeah. I really like that team. Big stat that I noticed for that game against Duke. That was the second most minutes that their starting lineup had gotten to play together all year, 23 minutes together, just because Efton Reed stayed out of foul trouble. That's enormous because that lineup has a great net rating when they're on the floor. So just keeping him out of foul trouble and keeping him on the floor is huge. I think Hunter Sallis is a stud. I'm still a little bit worried about Cam Hildreth and Boopy Miller at times, but Efton Reed is a really good defender. Andrew Carr's awesome. They got a lot of shooting, and when Salas is playing like that, I think that's a really good team. Like if they were an 11 seed, they could have potentially had a 6 seed that they're favored against in the first round of the NCAA
I
tournament.
agree.
That's a really dangerous squad. If they get out of their own way, I think they could do some real damage in that first weekend.
I'd like to see him win a few road games though. Like I'm big on like the teams that feast on their home court. I think like that's a true thing. I'd like to see him like right before maybe like ACC tournament, like go to the semis, beat a quality team. This is like I'm thinking about it now just as we're talking about, and you're saying like Wade, like they might be like favored as like an 11 versus 6. And I think they're definitely in the tournament now, barring like a real meltdown. But is there something to be said that the ACC tends to produce Final Four teams, not even in like the Duke UNC realm, because obviously those teams are like super talented, but like Miami last year, like we've seen ACC teams able to go on runs. Like, are you attributing that to anything? I'm putting you on the spot now, but like, do you think that maybe it's the style of play in the ACC?
Well, I think the teams that advanced have dudes. I mean, Miami was loaded last year. That's a really great team. Duke and North Carolina were loaded. And that's where I think like the conversation around the ACC has been, they've just lost me a lot this year because yes, the ACC stinks. And I understand that from the bottom of the league, like Notre Dame and Georgia Tech and Louisville and Miami this year and Boston College. Like I understand it. Those teams stink, but that doesn't mean anything in the NCAA tournament when it's time for Miami to suit up and get on the floor for 40 minutes. And like, it doesn't mean anything this year when Clemson gets out on the floor, Wake Forest gets out on the floor, Duke and North Carolina, those teams are talented, really talented. So I don't know if I necessarily, have one specific reason why these teams are winning. I just think they're really good. And so I think heading into this, in the NCAA tournament, I like 4 ACC teams. I'm not a Virginia guy. I just can't quite get there with that group. But Clemson, Wake, those dudes, both of those teams have pros with a lot of shot making and some real, like, they got some, like, they can play some defense too. And then Duke and North Carolina have a ton of talent too. So I just feel like the overall spectrum of the ACC stinks is fair because of the bottom, but that doesn't mean that the top of the league, like their top 4 are just as good as any of the top 4 in any other conference, honestly.
See, I think that's so interesting because I was doing an episode a few weeks ago, and as a Big Ten grad, I obviously I happen, especially over the last several years, like watched a ton of Big Ten basketball, and it's pretty notable. Big Ten tends to not do so well in the tournament. Like the conference doesn't translate. I do think the ACC and the brand of basketball they play, forget the bottom of the conference, the high end, that translates more to like a long run come tournament time, more versatility. The Big Ten, they send 8, 9 teams every year, but it's because they beat the crap out of themselves and they pump up their resumes because like they're all like quad 1, quad 2, when really those teams aren't any good.
Well, and this is a great comp because, all right, let's take the top 4 of the ACC. That's Duke, it's Carolina, it's Clemson, and Wake. Is that top 4 better than the Big Ten's top 4 of Purdue, Illinois, Wisconsin, and then Michigan State or Northwestern? Like they're better. That ACC is better.
If I had to like take net tournament wins, I guess like Purdue could conceivably win it all, but like net tournament wins of that top 4 ACC versus that top 4 of the Big Ten, ACC for sure.
Yeah, that's where I keep going back to it, where we have to separate these whole like conference versus conference arguments, and because it does not matter in those first round games. It's 40 minutes of basketball. It's lace them up. It's 10 dudes on the floor, and those ACT teams can really go. Now, can the Big Ten do it this year? I have kind of been like labeled, I guess, as a Purdue truther because I think they're a little bit better than what they were last year. I think Braden Smith's been awesome this year, one of the most improved players in college basketball, but I still have some questions about them. Illinois is super talented. They have moments where they can really get up and go. They have no question about them. They can score. I think you got to probably get 90 to beat Illinois. But their defense hasn't been necessarily.
I was about to say they might just let them 90 anyway.
That's right. But you got to do it, right? If you run into a team that can't make shots against Illinois, that's a problem. And so those 2 teams are still talented, but I'm not like buying into anybody else in the Big Ten as like a legit second weekend team. Like I don't see it with Michigan State. I don't see it with Wisconsin. I maybe Northwestern, I guess, if Boo Buie just goes on a huge run, but I just don't see it with a lot of those teams in the middle of the pack of the Big Ten. And, they're also going to get tough seeds, a lot of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seeds in that Big Ten middle.
Yeah. I got 2 more for you, and then we'll talk a few spots this week that you're looking forward to. Michigan State, we kind of just alluded to it. Am I wrong to say that this team like shouldn't make the tournament? Like if you just look at their resume, like they are closer, I think, to the bubble than people want to mention. Like I feel like if you know, like those Twitter, I don't know if you're big into bracketology, but like I'm kind of not until like now, but like if you do like the blind resumes where it's like team A and all their stuff and team B and all their stuff, I feel like Michigan State would lose to a lot of teams on like the team B from like the mid-major ranks.
The only reason that Michigan State is a little bit safe-ish for now, I think they're still probably a 9 seed right now, even after losing 2 games at home to Iowa and Ohio State, at home, who aren't going to make the tournament. The only reason is because their non-conference was awesome. They played a
But
really,
they lost all the games.
It doesn't matter.
I hate that. You got to win something.
I understand it, but it doesn't matter when you have enough of those great games that they went up against. Their high, I think they have one of the top 10 schedules in non-conference schedule, or not non-conference. I mean, I think it's just strength of schedule overall. That like top 17.
Probably because again, the Big Ten like kind of like pumps up their own scores pretty much.
Completely agree. But I genuinely like I agree with you. Like they have to win games down the stretch, and it's not going to be easy, right? We know Purdue's going to be a war. They get Northwestern at home. That's not easy because Boo Buie is the best player on the floor too, in that matchup. So if they lose those 2 games, then you could really have a situation where Michigan State is a lot closer to the bubble than people think. And you know, it's like they're kind of pulling a North Carolina, which is kind of crazy. It's like the team who a lot of people thought could potentially win the national title in the preseason doesn't make the tournament. It was North Carolina a couple years ago, and it could be Michigan State this year.
Yeah, and I mean, just Michigan State, first of all, they play at Indiana the last game of the season. Like, I know Indiana sucks, but road game Big Ten, you never know. Michigan State's been like flying really high on like 3-point splits both ways, like shooting and defense. I don't know. I don't see it. And I already know that Michigan State's going to make the Sweet 16 because that's just what they do. And like this, like fake Tom Izzo is like still really good role.
Get ready for the John Rothstein, January, February, Izzo,
April. One more, because Big 12 is the best conference in college basketball. We spoke about Houston, but nothing much. TCU is starting to put together a little bit of momentum here. I like to separate into 3 buckets. The 2020s, teams that are top 20 on both sides of the ball, like a 40-40, which is like a contender light, I like to call it. And then a like lopsided, where like a team is like top 20 on one side and outside the top 50 on the other. TCU is a contender light. Are you buying them? I know they're a little unique in how they go about their offense, and they're shooting really well from 3, probably much better than they should. But are you buying them? I know we're recording this Monday night, big game against Baylor tonight.
I'm torn on them. They're awesome in transition, right? I think they're number 2 in transition points per game this year, maybe number 1. And that was something that I think a lot of people were hesitant about buying in on them because they lost their stud point guard last year, Mike Miles Jr., and they also lost Damian Baugh. And people were like, okay, they're not going to be able to score in transition. Well, they went out in the portal and they found the right guys. Jameer Nelson Jr. is a big-time transition scorer, but it's really Emmanuel Miller that's really elevated this group. So I think Jamie Dixon overall is a good coach. I still have some questions about like what can you do in the half court when teams don't turn it over against you, or when teams take good shots and don't let you get runouts and get into transition. Like, how can you generate a lot of good offense in those question marks or in those little situations? But for the most part, this group they look like another Big 12 team where they're just so deep, so physical. They're really long. They're really athletic. They got old guards. That's kind of fits the prototype of a team that puts it together in March. Like, I guess I've been hesitant to fully buy in on them, but they just keep proving me wrong. And I kind of like the mix. I like the arrow. I think they're trending in the right direction. And I think this is a group that, like, we have to remember the history of this program has been really bad from basketball perspective. Yeah. So it's really cool that TCU is relevant year after year after year. Like, this just doesn't happen in TCU basketball. And Jamie Dixon's a big reason why.
Yeah, 100%. One more thing. When, you have in the last 2 weeks of the season, you have conference tournament. We're talking like big picture, right? Like we're talking tournament preview. Are you at a point though where you look at these teams and their profiles and you're like, this team is what it is? Like Kentucky. I'm just throwing an example. Like people are going to say like, here comes Kentucky. Like they're getting hot. Like don't let the defense.
Yes.
Yeah, like they're getting going. But we now have like 25 games of sample, give or take 24. Are you at a point though where like, I know like, big result here, like resume builder here, but like the actual team, are you at a point where it's like, I know what I know about this? Like, no, I'm ready. I know what I'm ready to see, or I know what I've seen.
Yeah, I'm ready for the test, right? Like we've gone through all the semester. We're ready for the test. That's how I feel about Creighton. Like Creighton is one of those teams where I feel like I know what I'm going to get from them. They're awesome shot making. I love the data. I love the all threes and layups. And then defensively, I love that they take away shots at the rim. They take away threes and force you to hit mid-range twos. I get that. That's awesome. I really do. I really do. But the problem with Creighton, and the problem always with Creighton all year, has been hot teams with high level athleticism who can really heat them up at times, can give them issues. And so I think Creighton is one of those teams where I feel like I know the story with them. And honestly, I like it. I like what they do. I think they can make the Final Four, but I'm not sure that they have quite enough of that athletic pop to necessarily win the title. So I'm fascinated by their draw. Fascinated because
I was gonna say they're a very draw dependent team. Like huge. To me, like there's some teams that kind of throw them in there and let them just like I believe that they could win some games or whatever. Like Creighton to me, if they draw like I want to try and pull one up. Like if they draw like an athletic defense that could really like bother them.
Iowa State
could give them absolute hell in like a Sweet 16 matchup. Yeah. Like teams that can really get up in them. Obviously, Houston would be a nightmare for them.
What about like New Mexico with all those guards that got really great juice? If New Mexico gets in the tournament and they're like a 10 and Creighton's let's say
TCU, another example, a team that could pressure them. Absolutely. Also, like maybe get Kalkbrenner in foul trouble too with the way they get to the rim. Like that's not a fun matchup for them. I mean, they played last year, but San Diego State, probably not a fun one again either. Like those are, to me, and I've done this on the pod as well, like Creighton to me, you said they're solvable. Both like in a way that I know, and I know who they can beat, but I also know who they could lose to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And their style of play keeps them involved in games and keeps them, I think, close enough in games with really great teams. But I think it also keeps kind of mediocre-ish team like St. John's can kind of stick in it with them a little bit because St. John's is the most athletic group at all. But if you like, that's fine against Creighton because they don't necessarily have that elite translatable, like that big bodied wing. And like, I don't think Arthur Kaluma is a great player or a great teammate, to be honest. But they could have used an Arthur Kaluma. This group could have, and it's just a big loss to have him go.
I think they miss Nembhard also. To be honest with you,
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. I've kind of gone back and forth on it a little bit this year. You know, Nembhard, his jumper has kind of been inconsistent in and out. Ashworth starting to come along a little bit, but they're just different. You know, Ashworth is not a true point guard. Nembhard is way more of a true point guard. So it's hard to compare them when they do such different things well. So I think I agree with you, but I think it's a little more nuanced than just a 1-for-1. And I said it before in the beginning, it was a 1-for-1. And I think I was wrong in the preseason.
100%. All right. Any spots you're looking forward to this week on the card? Player props count as well. I know that seems to be your specialty, but any and all things are considered here.
I don't have any lines up yet, so I would love to have like 10 player props for you, but I don't have a ton of lines yet. But the one I'm looking at, I think I love fading teams after huge wins, and so I'm probably going to be on Mississippi State tomorrow.
Yeah, you are. We're going with the Bulldogs.
Yeah, like that's a really good spot for me. Pittsburgh's a team that I've been iffy on this year just because their range of outcomes is so wide because they shoot so many threes. I think they're like 48% of their shots this year have been threes at times. So I think I'm going to be on Clemson as well, too. Both of those are tomorrow. The lines aren't out for them yet. Last I checked, maybe they are lately. But if I could get a Clemson -5, I think I'd probably be on that one. And then Mississippi State at home. Those are the two that I really like.
Yeah. For me, this is Wednesday, Tennessee. KenPom has it 3. I imagine it will be shaded that way because the odds makers have started to shift pretty aggressively. I think anything under 5 with Tennessee, honestly, I think that they set up really nicely to beat up on Auburn. I think Tennessee, that loss to A&M maybe kind of shook the confidence of some people. Not me, was not shaken. I still think that this team has the goods at home, especially we spoke about earlier in the show, Auburn, home court merchant. I think Tennessee is set up for a big effort there, win by a few possessions.
Well, and the other thing, too, with Tennessee is like they got really challenged on the glass a couple weeks ago, and they've come back with great efforts on the glass the last few days and last few games. That will have to stick against Auburn. And if you can rebound against Auburn, you can hold down the fort against that group. And obviously Dalton Connect having a game changer like that is a big time piece. I'm not sure that Auburn has a guy that can go toe to toe with Dalton Connect on the perimeter.
100%. Isaac, you're great. Appreciate you coming on, man. Plug your stuff. Where can people find your work? And yeah, please.
Yeah, 247sports.com. That's where most of my stories are. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Isaac_Trotter. Any and all basketball content is great. It's March. It's almost March. It's the best time of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach, the bet stamp at RW33. We'll be back next week. Another conference tournament preview in the mid-major ranks, looking ahead to the rest of the regular season. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Best of luck with all your bets. Isaac, thanks again for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.